Today's video, we're going to be building a new kit from Eachine. Now, this is called the Eachine Tyro 119. It is a 6-inch quadcopter that comes with everything you need other than the batteries and a receiver and obviously controller and goggles. But in terms of the quadcopter itself, all it's missing is a battery and the receiver. So this is going to be a beginner's build guide. I'm going to take you step by step how to do everything as efficiently as possible and also explain what everything does so you know what you're doing, give you some tips and tricks on how to solder, what to avoid. Here's a quick example. So we have these 3 motor wires. Where do they go and how do you know the orientation? I'll be covering all of that, so I'll clarify a lot of things for you that you probably didn't know or it's very difficult to find online. So let's quickly talk about this kit. Now, I've gotten another kit that's exactly identical, but it was a 7-inch. This is a 6-inch quadcopter. The 7-inch was insane and very efficient. It's all about efficiency here. And out of the box experience, it was pretty good in building perspective if you followed my previous video for the 7-inch. So let's cover these components. Now, for motors, we're using 2407 1850 kV, so they are low kV, so they're expecting you to run 5 to 6 S lipos on this thing. Also 4S would be okay. So again, this is a 6-inch quadcopter, and you can also put 5-inch props on there if you wanted to. They also provide you with the GPS. Now, if you do install the GPS, you need to take something into consideration. If the GPS does not get locked, because it takes some time to get all the satellites, and it'll tell you on the on-screen display. If it doesn't have lock, it will not allow you to arm. And if you run into that issue, you can just disable the GPS, and I'll show you how to do that later on. So that's something just to take note of here in case you run into that issue. Also, this is going to be our video transmitter. It's a pretty good video transmitter, nothing to complain about. Great antenna as well for the quadcopter itself. Pretty good camera, which is a Hakcrc. This is the mid-range brand right here, so that's also really great. The connector will need also a flight controller, which has a 10-volt regulator on board. Now, this is the main brain of the whole operation. This will receive the input from your RC transmitter. Also, bring it down to the electronic speed controller, which is this thing right here, to tell the motors what to do. So this is the brains of the whole operation. It also has something called the on-screen display, which gives you valuable information down on your goggles, such as battery voltage, GPS location, and it points to home. So, you know, if you ever lost where you're at, there'll be an arrow telling you where home is, and just follow that arrow until you find yourself. So it's really nice in that perspective. And they give you some 3D printed parts, and as well as every other wire you're going to need. Now, the amount of soldering that's going to be needed for this is absolute minimal, so it's a really great beginner kit here, and you could really upgrade it as time goes on. You could upgrade the motors, upgrade the ESCs. One of the first upgrades I'd highly recommend, possibly later on, would be the internals here, would be the flight controller and electronic speed controller. I'll have a link to a premium setup for you if you wanted to go ahead and explore that option. So let's get started. Now, the first thing I always like to do when I approach any build is start with the flight controller. So we're going to start with everything that's going to be connected here and then move to everything else, because this just makes the whole process so much easier. Now, some of the tools you'll need is some tweezers. I'll have some linked down below as well, and some hex drivers, because if you do end up stripping a screw, you could basically ruin your whole frame or a motor. You'll never be able to get that motor out, or it'll be very, very difficult, and you have a high probability of damaging something. Thus, your whole quadcopter went to waste, and you have to wait till you order some new parts and figure something out. So it's highly recommended to use some proper hex driver tools, and I'll have some linked down below, the ones that I recommend. So usually on any other custom built quadcopter, you would start soldering, but here we're not going to have to solder that much to the flight controller because everything is coming with a connector, which is really, really great here. So for example, first of all, let's start with the camera. Now, the camera is going to be connected right here. So if you take a note of the arrow right here, which is pointing forward, because this is how it's supposed to be installed in your quadcopter, the camera is going to be this one right here. And the wire for the camera is going to be this right here. And the way we would set that up is we would just install that right there. Now, if it doesn't go in, flip it, make sure it goes in, and it should go in just like this. The next thing we want is the video transmitter. Now, the video transmitter has an identical connector on each end, which is this one right here. You can see the yellow wire is moved slightly, and that's going to go right here, just like that, and we're going to be good to go into that perspective. And if you're unsure, what we can see is we can see that the red wire is usually the power, and if you take a closer look in there, you'll see that it says 10 volts, and then under it has a minus, which means the black wire, which means ground. And then we can see the one before the last, it says VTX, so that's going to be the video line that's going to be outputted through here, so it could go down to your goggles. So the VTX is the video transmitter, if you didn't know that. Next, we're going to be needing the wire for the receiver. Now it comes like this, and what we're going to have to do is we're going to cut it. So let's go ahead and do that right now before we jump into anything else here. So I'm going to kind of shorten this down a little bit, maybe around just halfway point seems to be good. So it'll give me some flexibility on where I want to place this. So you want to go ahead and cut it up and just strip it. Now once the wire has been cut and stripped, I highly recommend you twist the ends. It's very important before we add the solder. So you don't risk the chance of one of these little wires just sticking to the side, shorting something out, and there goes your whole quadcopter. So keep that in mind. That's very important, and you should just be careful. So what I like to do is I like to bring my solder and just have it levitate in the air like that, and I just bring in my wire and just add the solder to it. So just like that. So once we have the solder on the wire here, the next thing we want to do is we actually want to install it into our receiver. Now I'm going to be using S-Bus. Now I-Bus, you will also do the same thing, which is FlySky. The yellow wire is going to be the signal, whether it's S-Bus or I-Bus. The red wire is going to be 5 volt and the black wire is going to be ground. Now I already know the orientation that this one is, which is going to be, this is going to be my S-Bus signal. Now you also take note how I am currently soldering. Since I'm right-handed, I'm starting with the left side first, because that just makes everything easier for me when I move down the other way, so I don't risk bumping into anything. So you can heat up the pad, then bring the wire on top, and then heat both of them up together, and wait a little bit, and then you should have a good connection. But now we're going to do the ground wire. So as you can tell right here, we have it set up, and as you can tell, it doesn't look so clean. It's because the wires aren't really that great, and the more heat you keep on there, they kind of tend to melt. So you want to try to do this as quick as possible, but also as good as possible. Now we go ahead and bring in our flight controller again, and we're going to go ahead and plug this right on the back right here. And now we are basically done with the flight controller. All we need is one more wire, which is going to be this black wire. This one is going to be connected to the electronic speed controller, because this wire right here will be telling the electronic speed controller what to do, and at the same time the electronic speed controller will be powering this, which will be powering everything else that's connected to it. For example, camera, video transmitter, and the receiver itself here. Now, if you do this just like this, it'll never work. The receiver will never work until you bridge one of these two right here. Now, we have these 3 pads right here, and if you're using S-Bus, what you want to do is you want to bridge the left one with the middle one. Don't bridge the one all the way on the right. That's for S-Bus. Now, if you had I-Bus, you want to bridge the right one with the middle one, and you should be good to go. So let's go ahead and do that together. There we go, just like that. And that's bridged currently. So we bridged there was 3 pads right there. They're really, really tiny, so it makes it really easy to bridge. So we bridged the 2 left because we're using S-Bus. And again, if you're using I-Bus, you would do the one in the middle and the one on the right, and you should be good to go. So like this, we're basically completely done with the flight controller. So let's go ahead and move this to the side. So now let's take a look at the ESC, and also take note of the way I've installed it. It's very important that you install it this way, where the connector is up top and the ESR capacitor is in the back. And this is the back of the frame. This is where the camera plates will go. So this is the front of the frame. It's very important you install it this way, or else your quadcopter will never fly, because each motor has to be in a specific area. For example, the software we use knows that when it sends a command to motor 1, that this should be motor 1 right here, and this would be motor 2, and this would be motor 3, and motor 4. You'll eventually learn that, because you just have to learn that once. And if you take a closer look at the ESC, you will find where it says 1 right in the edge, 2 right there, 3 and 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and start adding solder to the ESC here. We'll do 3 pads together, and I'll skip the rest, and then we can start installing the motors and also the battery connector. So usually on ESCs, when you want to start soldering ESCs, you kind of want to bump up the temperature. Right now I have mine set to 410 degrees Celsius. But if you need to also take something into consideration, you want to keep an eye on the tip not to go black, and keep feeding it solder even if you're not using it. You want it to be as shiny as possible so the heat would transfer really nice and easily. Also, another side note here, when you're soldering, try to rest your forearms at the edge of the table. This gives you much more accuracy and much more precision, as well as stability. And that is what I'm currently doing here. So right now what I want to do is I want to go ahead and start heating up the pad first and bringing a little bit of solder. And I don't want to hold it too much, because if you hold it too much, then the solder is going to fall through the other side. Just like that seems pretty good. So we're going to do these. We'll do 6 together, and so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm doing here. So I'm heating up the pad first, and then I bring in a little bit of solder. Make sure you take your time. You don't want to hit those ICs right there or those MOSFETs right there, because you could bridge a couple things, which could kind of give you a little nightmare. So this side's complete. I'm going to go ahead and skip that side. Then we come back and do the power terminals here. All right, so once both sides are done, we want to go ahead and remove this. Now be careful when removing it, not to pull from the capacitor, because the capacitor could pop off, and also the board might be hot. So keep that in mind. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and bring in our XT60 connector, which is where the battery will be connected. And we're going to go ahead and just install these right through. So where you see bat, that's where the red wire is going to go right through. So we can just set that up just like that. There we go. And then the G and D would be black. Ground is always black. And I'm just going to double check this fits good and it's not going to have any issues. That's great. So we're going to do it from the bottom here. All right, so before installing them through the holes, the first thing I want to do is I want to actually add some solder to these, even though they already have some on, but just to add more fresh solder, it's just going to make your life so much easier, because usually the hardest thing to solder are these power terminals on ESCs, because they take some time and, you know, you just got to get used to it. There we go. So that's looking good. You don't want to put too much to where it won't fit through the hole, so just keep that in mind, and that's what she said. All right, so once you install them in, common sense might tell you to route them back like that. But what that happens is these kind of go too far frontwards and they get really close to these components. And you want to kind of do it just the opposite way right now. So you have these pointing away from anything else. So when you solder, you're going to be good. So I'm just going to drop this down just like this. Bring in something slightly heavy and just place it on the ESC right here, just like that. And then I'm going to start adding solder to these. Now, I'm going to start heating up the pad and the wire also. Now, the wire did also have some fresh solder on there, so it should melt pretty easy. And again, I'm soldering at 400 degrees Celsius. There we go. And that's good. That's perfect. Now we do the next one. Same concept. Heat up both pads and wire. Just be touching both of them. And the ground is always harder because the ground is all over the board. It dissipates the heat. So that's why you could find it a bit more difficult than the positive, and you might need to increase the temperature or just give it more time. So keep that in mind. It's very important. So you get a good ground connection here, and that's currently installed. Now we could route these back like that, and we have a really nice setup like this, as you can tell right there. Really shiny, that's what you want to see. So now like this, our battery leads are basically complete. So now the next thing you want to do before we put the ESC back into the frame, make sure the motors are installed, which will make your life a lot easier. And what you want to do is we want to add solder to every single wire here, because it'll make our life so much easier. Now make sure you don't place anything in here, because if solder were to splatter by accident, you could ruin that board. So keep that in mind. That's also very, very important, so you don't screw your whole thing up here. So I'll do one motor together here. So what I like to do is have the solder basically levitate off the table, because you can do that. And then I just start bringing in the wire next to it. And then I just heat both of them up together. I hold the soldering iron on the wire, and then I move down on the solder. And it just starts melting right on the wire, which is really nice. Then I grab the next one, same thing. I'm going to skip the other motors, but it's just the same concept. And you can see the solder just splattered everywhere. This is what I was talking about, that you need to be very careful of and make sure the other components are not around, because just a quick splatter like that could ruin your whole board. And good luck removing that from the board if that were to happen here. As you can tell, we got some solder splattered right there on the motor wire, and I'm even having a difficult time removing it. So I'm going to go ahead and do this for the rest of the motor wires, and then we'll come back and see what's the next step. So once you add solder to all the motor wires, the next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and bring our ESC back and install it into place. Again, make sure you install it the same way I am installing it, where this is to the front and this is to the back. The two closer standoffs are to the back and the wider ones are to the front here. And it should look something like this. So, and again, now when we start soldering, you need to take note of if you're either left-handed or right-handed, because this is going to play a really big role. Now, I'm right-handed, so it's best to start from the left side. So when we come in with the soldering iron, we don't risk hitting anything else that's currently installed. This way, it's just going to make our life so much easier. And if you take a look at the motor, it doesn't matter which way these are installed, because, for example, if the motor is spinning the wrong way, then what you want to do is you can just change any two of these on the ESC, and you'll have it spin the correct way that you need it to. But right now what we're going to do is we're going to install them all straight direct. So the one all the way to the left here, we're going to install it all the way to the left, and we're just going to do the same process for everything else. Now I highly recommend you get yourself some tweezers because the wires might get pretty toasty here. So I'm going to go ahead and heat up the pad first, and then I'm going to bring up the wire, and then I'm just going to go ahead and heat up both the pad and the wire. Keep it there for a little bit. You should hear a nice crunching sound. And we have our first motor wire into place. We'll do a couple of these together so you get the idea, and then you can go ahead and try it on your own. So make sure you move the other motor wires so you don't burn them by mistake, and make sure the tip of the soldering iron is also very shiny and clean. Again, we're going to heat up the pad, then we're going to bring the wire and heat up both the pad and the wire at the same time, just like that. You should hear a really nice crunching sound. Boom, really nicely. Now, and again, we'll do the same concept. Heat up. Don't be in a rush. Don't be scared. Just take your time. And then you just put the wire over the pad, and then you heat just the wire on top of the pad, and then that heats both of them right up for you. So basically, we preheat the pad to make our life a little bit easier, and we could worry about the wires and how to set these up later on. We could use either some tape, which I highly recommend, or some zip ties, which I don't recommend, but I still use just zip ties because I get lazy sometimes. And try not to get lazy with anything you're doing here, because that could come back and haunt you really, really bad. All right, so now at this stage, everything is just Lego puzzle. There is no more soldering done. We finished all the soldering. So what we want next is we want these nylon standoffs. They also provide them in the packaging here. So we're going to go ahead and install these just like that. All right, once those are installed very nice and snug here, we want to go ahead and bring the flight controller and also take note of the arrow. Now, and again, the connector here is in the front. So I'm going to grab this black connector first. I'm going to go ahead and connect it right here because this is the one that's going to be allowing us to get power and also control the motor. So we got that connected in the front here. Next, we want to go ahead and bring our flight controller and make sure the arrow is pointing forward, which is this way. And we're just going to go ahead and bring that right in. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and connect the connector right into where it's supposed to go. Now the next thing, we want to go ahead and grab the other nylon standoffs that we got, which are these little guys. We're going to install it on top of the flight controller. All right, so after the standoffs are into place, you want to take note of the video transmitter's position here. Keep this part, the gold part, right on the right side and the connector on the left side. And then we're going to grab our connector for the video transmitter, which is going to be that one. We're going to go ahead and place it in just like that. And we are going to install it right on top here. It's going to be a pretty tight fit, but remember, you could bend these plastic standoffs, so you're going to be good in that perspective. So the next thing we want to do is actually bring in the connector for the video transmitter, which is this guy right here. This is where the antenna is going to be connected. And what you'll find is it'll come with all these little things on it. You're going to have to remove these because if you don't, then you're not going to get a full connection. You could burn your video transmitter if you use those. So we're going to have to install this just like this. Make sure the flat side right here, which is the bent side, so you see it's going flat and then bending down. You want to set that up in there just like that to the inside part right here. So this is how you want to do it. You want it to be bent like this, and then you want to bring it to the side and just install it from the side here, just like that. There we go. So that's connected into place now, and this is going to kind of stay loose, but usually you're not going to be removing the antenna. So we're going to start installing the antenna, and the antenna should actually pull that right through the plastic piece right here. So while you're installing the antenna, what you want to take note of here is you don't want it to be this loose. Look how this is not moving, but the whole antenna is moving. That means it doesn't have a good connection. What you want to do is you want to make it as tight as possible. So when you move this, everything is moving just like that. That means you got a really good connection, and that's how it should be connected, or else your video transmitter can burn itself. Because if you power this on without an antenna, the video transmitter usually blows itself. So next thing, we're going to grab our little nylon nuts, which is also provided, and we're going to go ahead and put them right on top of the video transmitter here. So I'm going to go ahead and skip this over. All right, so right now what we're left with is the camera wire, and we need to go ahead and grab our camera. Now the camera is going to be installed with the cadex sign up top, so it should be installed in your quadcopter like this. First of all, we're going to need to bring in our camera plates here and also find the correct screws, which are also provided in the package, which are these ones right here. You're going to find them, they're going to look different than everything else, which are these little tiny ones. They're the smallest screws you'll find in the goodie bag that you're going to receive. So that's where that's going to be installed. So I'm going to go ahead and just install those. There we go. Now that's into place here. So the next thing we need is the GPS. However, I'm not going to be connecting the GPS. The GPS comes with double-sided tape, so you can actually use double-sided tape here on the bottom, and you could tape it down here, back here. And the connector is very simple. There's only one connector left, which is in the back right there, and that's where that's going to go. You just find the side that fits to the GPS here, which is going to be the small side, and that's just going to go right there, and you'll have your GPS connected. However, I'm not going to be using it for this quadcopter right here. All right, guys, so the quadcopter is complete like this. Now all that's left is to program it, bind it, and go fly it, which will be in part 2 of the video. And if you're curious how this thing flies, you can go ahead and check out my Tyro 129 video. I have both the build video, flight video, and the configuration video, which you can go ahead and check those out if you can't wait. Once I have time, the weather clears up, I'll go ahead and do part 2 on this. But overall, this is a pretty efficient little quadcopter on a 7-inch, so 6-inch should be pretty good as well. And everything's linked down below. Go ahead and check it out, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. Peace out.